The recruiter's email had the Navy's official header, but something about it felt off from the start. I'd been out of the service for 18 months when it showed up in my inbox. Subject line, Specialized Submarine Assignment, Compensation Package attached. Most Navy communications went through proper channels, not direct emails to personal accounts. But I opened it anyway because my bank account had exactly $347 in it, and my landlord had already slipped 2 late notices under my apartment door. The email was short. Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Webb, your sonar expertise and deep water experience have brought you to our attention for a specialized research contract. 6-month deployment aboard the USS Persephone, a Seawolf-class submarine conducting oceanographic surveys in the North Atlantic. Compensation significantly exceeds standard military pay. Security clearance required. Interested candidates should respond within 48 hours. The attached PDF showed a salary that made me read it 3 times. $180,000 for 6 months. That was more than I'd made in 3 years of active duty. The contract came from something called Maritime Research Solutions, LLC, with a Pentagon liaison officer listed as the point of contact. Everything looked legitimate when I checked it out. The company existed, had government contracts going back to the early 2000s, and the liaison's name appeared in official DoD directories. I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why they needed to pay so much for what sounded like routine survey work. But I'd been scraping by on VA disability payments and part-time work at a marine supply store since my medical discharge. The Navy had classified my hearing loss as insufficient for continued sonar work, even though I could still pick up frequencies that made the new kids' ears bleed. They'd thanked me for my service and shown me the door. I responded to the email within an hour. The physical examination took place at a private medical facility in Norfolk, not a VA hospital. The doctor who checked me over was military, I could tell by his bearing, but he wore civilian clothes and introduced himself only as Dr. Reeves. He spent an unusual amount of time on my ears, running tests I'd never encountered during my active duty physicals. Your file says you were discharged for hearing damage, Dr. Reeves said, studying a tablet that showed my audiogram results. But these readings are remarkable. You're picking up frequencies at both ends of the spectrum that most people can't detect. That's why they let me go. The standard equipment couldn't utilize my range. They said I was outside operational parameters. Dr. Reeves made a note. For this assignment, that's actually ideal. He didn't elaborate, and when I pressed him, he just smiled and said I'd be briefed fully upon arrival. 3 weeks later, I flew into a small airfield in Newfoundland. A driver met me at the plane, a silent guy who checked my ID twice before loading my gear into a black SUV. We drove for 2 hours along increasingly remote coastal roads until we reached what looked like an abandoned fishing village. A single dock stretched into the dark water, and at the end of it sat a small launch. The USS Persephone wasn't docked at any official naval facility. She waited 5 miles offshore, her hull barely breaking the surface in the pre-dawn darkness. As our launch approached, I got my first good look at her. Seawolf-class submarines were already the quietest boats in the Navy's fleet, but this one had modifications I didn't recognize. Extra hull plating near the bow, unusual sensor arrays running along her sides, and hatches in places where standard Seawolf-class boats had smooth hull. Commander Elizabeth Torres met me as I climbed aboard. She was younger than I expected for a submarine commander, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that sized me up in about 3 seconds. Welcome aboard the Persephone, Petty Officer Webb. I trust your journey was uneventful. Yes, ma'am, though I expected to arrive at a naval base. We maintain low profile for operational security. Come, I'll show you to your station. The interior of the Persephone looked standard at first. Narrow corridors, efficient use of every square foot, the familiar hum of systems that kept us alive underwater. But as Torres led me deeper into the boat, I noticed modifications. Pressure sensors that weren't standard Navy issue, additional bulkheads that created sealed sections, and the crew, only about 30 people when a Seawolf-class boat normally carried 130. Skeleton crew, Torres explained when she saw me looking around. "This isn't a combat deployment. We're conducting specialized oceanographic research. You'll meet everyone at the briefing in 2 hours." She showed me to my quarters, a small berth I'd be sharing with the other sonar technician. My bunkmate wasn't there, so I stowed my gear and tried to rest. Sleep didn't come. The submarine's sounds felt wrong, too quiet even for a sea wolf. And underneath the normal mechanical hums, I could hear something else, a low-frequency resonance that shouldn't be there, like the ocean itself was humming. The briefing took place in the mess hall. Commander Torres stood at the front, joined by a civilian I hadn't met yet. He introduced himself as Dr. Foster, chief scientist for the project. "Gentlemen and ladies," Torres began, "welcome to Project Prometheus. What we're about to discuss is classified top secret, special access required. What happens on this boat stays on this boat. Are we clear?" Everyone nodded. There were 13 of us total. Besides Torres and Foster, we had a small engineering crew, a medic named Dr. Sarah Chen, 2 other scientists, 3 sonar techs, including me, and a handful of other specialists. Dr. Foster pulled up a display showing bathymetric maps of the North Atlantic. 3 years ago, one of our research vessels detected an anomaly at approximately 3,000 meters depth, what appeared to be a secondary atmospheric interface layer.
"What do you mean, something else?" asked Jenkins, one of the other sonar techs. Foster smiled. "That's what we're here to find out. Initial readings suggest the water below this boundary has different properties, different density, different composition, possibly even different behavior." "That's impossible," said Rodriguez, our senior engineer. "Water is water." "So we thought," Torres interjected, "but 3 separate vessels have confirmed the readings. There's something down there, a layer approximately 200 meters thick that appears to be breathable." The room went silent. Finally, I spoke up. "Breathable? Like humans can breathe it?" "We don't know," Foster said, "but the gas analysis suggests an oxygen-nitrogen mix similar to surface atmosphere, which, as you can imagine, raises some extraordinary questions." He pulled up more data. "The layer exists in a specific region of the North Atlantic, roughly circular, about 100 kilometers in diameter. It's been remarkably stable since we first detected it. Our mission is to study it, map it, and if possible, determine its origin and purpose." "Purpose?" I asked. "You're saying it's artificial?" Foster and Torres exchanged a look. "That's one possibility we're investigating," Torres said carefully. The briefing continued for another hour. We'd be conducting multiple dives to the boundary layer, using the Persephone's advanced sensors to study it from above. Foster and his team had developed specialized equipment for measuring the interface. If conditions were right, they'd even deploy a remotely operated vehicle to collect samples. What Torres didn't mention, and what I found out later, was that the Persephone wasn't the first submarine sent to study the anomaly. 2 years earlier, the USS Tantalus had spent 3 months in the same area. The Navy had classified that mission's results and transferred the entire crew to different assignments. When I tried to look up anyone who'd served on the Tantalus, I found their service records had been sealed. We submerged at 0400 hours the next morning. The dive was smooth, routine, the kind of thing I'd done hundreds of times during my active duty. Commander Torres ran a tight boat, every system checked and double-checked. As we leveled out at 300 meters, I took my position at the sonar station. That's when I heard it clearly for the first time. The sound I'd noticed earlier, the low-frequency hum. It was stronger now, more distinct, not just one frequency, but multiple tones layered over each other, creating a complex harmonic pattern. "You picking that up?" asked Mitchell, the sonar tech at the station next to mine. "Yeah. What is it?" "No idea. Been there since we arrived in this area. Foster says it's probably geological, thermal vents or something." Mitchell didn't sound convinced.
I spent the next 6 hours familiarizing myself with our sonar systems. The Persephone carried equipment I'd never seen before, arrays that could detect pressure variations measured in millionths of an atmosphere, sensors that picked up chemical composition changes in real time. This wasn't standard Navy gear. This was cutting-edge research technology, the kind that cost millions per unit. We reached the target depth at 1,800 hours, 3,000 meters, deep enough that the pressure outside would crush an unprotected human instantly. On my displays, I could see it, the boundary layer. It showed up as a distinct thermocline, but that wasn't what made it unusual. The acoustic properties were wrong. Sound waves that should have continued downward were reflecting back as if they'd hit a solid surface. But we weren't at the ocean floor. According to our charts, the bottom was still another 1,000 meters down. "Deploy the ROV," Torres ordered. The remotely operated vehicle launched from the Persephone's hull, its cameras and sensors feeding data back to the control station, where Foster and his team huddled over displays. I watched on my sonar as the ROV descended toward the boundary. "Contact in 30 seconds, Foster announced. The ROV's cameras showed clear water, then suddenly a visible interface. It looked like the surface of the ocean, but inverted, a rippling boundary between darker water above and something clearer below. "Penetrating the layer," Foster said. The ROV crossed through, and for a moment its signal got fuzzy, then it cleared, and we could see what lay beneath. Water, but different, clearer, almost luminescent. The ROV's instruments started feeding back data that made Foster's team murmur with excitement. Gas analysis confirms initial readings: oxygen concentration 23%, nitrogen 76%, trace gases including... That can't be right. "What?" Torres demanded. "There are organic compounds in the mix, complex molecules that shouldn't exist at this depth and pressure." I adjusted my sonar to focus around the ROV. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were shapes down there, large shapes, moving slowly beneath the boundary layer. They didn't match any whale species I knew, and I knew them all. These moved wrong, with a strange fluid motion that seemed more like floating than swimming. "Commander," I said, "I'm picking up multiple large contacts below the ROV, range 500 meters and closing." Torres came to my station, studying my display. "What are they?" "Unknown, madam. Size suggests something massive, at least 30 meters long." Foster's voice came over the comm. "Webb, can you get acoustic profiles?" I adjusted my equipment, sending out a series of pings. The returns that came back didn't make sense. The objects had complex internal structures, almost like they had chambers or organs, but the density was all wrong for any living creature. "Bring the ROV back," Torres ordered. "Now." But as the ROV started its ascent, something grabbed it. One moment it was rising normally, the next it was being pulled down into the deeper layer. The cameras showed something that looked like a tentacle or an arm, but the texture was wrong. It seemed to be made of the same luminescent water as the layer itself, given temporary form. The feed went dead.
"We lost it," Foster said, his voice tight. Torres didn't waste time. "Take us up. 500 meters, level off." As the Persephone rose, I kept my attention on the sonar. The large shapes stayed below the boundary layer, but they moved to stay directly beneath us, following us. "They're tracking us," I reported. "That's impossible," Rodriguez said. "They need complex sensory systems." "I'm telling you what I'm seeing." Torres made a decision. "We're returning to safe depth. Foster, I want a full analysis of everything the ROV collected before we lost it. Engineering, conduct a full systems check. We're not going back down until I understand what we're dealing with." That night, I couldn't sleep. My bunkmate, a quiet guy named Patterson, who worked in engineering, was snoring softly, but I lay awake listening to the submarine sounds. That low-frequency hum was still there, and now that I'd heard it clearly, I couldn't unhear it. It wasn't random noise. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm that reminded me of breathing. Around 0200, I gave up on sleep and headed to the galley for coffee. Dr. Chen was there, also awake,
studying something on a tablet. Can't sleep either? She asked. Too much on my mind. You? She hesitated, then turned her tablet so I could see. I've been going through medical records. Foster gave me access to some historical data from previous research missions. The Tantalus? Chen looked surprised. You know about that? I know it existed. Everything else is classified. The crew started experiencing symptoms after 3 weeks studying the boundary layer: headaches, auditory hallucinations, episodes of lost time. By the end of their mission, 6 crew members had to be medically evacuated. What was wrong with them? That's just it. The doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong, but their brain scans showed unusual activity patterns, synchronized activity that shouldn't occur naturally. You think the layer did something to them? Chen closed her tablet. I think there's a lot about this mission we haven't been told, and I think whatever happened to the Tantalus crew might be starting to happen to us. I thought about that as I returned to my bunk. Had I been experiencing lost time? I couldn't remember falling asleep earlier, just lying there listening to the hum, but now it was 0200, so I must have dozed off at some point. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. We'd descend to observe the boundary layer, deploy various sensors and probes, and whatever we sent down either malfunctioned or disappeared. Foster grew increasingly frustrated, Torres increasingly cautious. The crew started developing the symptoms Chen had mentioned. Headaches were common, and I heard more people complaining about poor sleep. What bothered me most was the sonar data. Those large shapes below the boundary were always there now, always directly beneath us, and they were getting closer, not crossing the boundary, but pressing up against it from below, as if testing it. On the 4th day, Mitchell collapsed at his sonar station. I was beside him when it happened. One moment, he was running a standard acoustic scan. The next, he was convulsing on the deck. Dr. Chen rushed him to the medical bay, but not before I saw his eyes. They changed color, from brown to a pale blue-green that seemed to glow faintly in the dim corridor lighting. "Everyone out," Chen ordered, sealing the medical bay. I stood outside with Patterson and Rodriguez. Through the door, we could hear Mitchell screaming, not in pain, but like he was terrified of something only he could see. Commander Torres arrived minutes later. "Report. Mitchell collapsed, some kind of seizure." Torres's jaw tightened. "How long were we at depth today?" 6 hours, Rodriguez answered. Torres pulled out her comm. "Foster, I need you in the medical bay, now." When Foster arrived, Torres made him explain what was really happening. Foster tried to dodge the question at first, but Torres wasn't having it. "The Tantalus crew," Foster admitted finally. "They were exposed to the boundary layer for extended periods. We thought we'd learned from their mistakes, limited our exposure time, but the effects might be cumulative." "What effects?" Torres demanded. "The water in that layer, it's not just different composition, it's alive in a way we don't understand. It contains microscopic organisms that can survive in both aquatic and atmospheric environments. When we're this close to it, those organisms become airborne inside the submarine. Our filtration systems can't catch them because they're too small." "You're saying we're breathing them?" "We think so. And once they're in your system, they start to change you, slowly, making your body better adapted to survive in that layer." I felt sick. "The people below, in the layer, are they—" "We don't know what they are," Foster said quickly. "But yes, we believe they were human once. Crew from previous expeditions, research vessels that disappeared in this area. They adapted, changed, and now they live down there." Torres looked like she wanted to hit him. "You knew this was a possibility and you brought us here anyway? The Navy wants to understand this phenomenon, to control it. Imagine soldiers who could operate underwater without equipment, intelligence assets who could infiltrate anywhere. The applications are—" "You son of a bitch," Rodriguez interrupted. "You're not studying this, you're weaponizing it." Foster didn't deny it. Torres made her decision.
We're surfacing, now. I don't care what orders say, I'm not losing my crew to this. But when Rodriguez tried to take us up, the systems didn't respond. Commander, we have a problem. Ballast controls aren't responding, neither are the dive planes. Override them manually. I'm trying, nothing's working. I returned to my sonar station because I knew what was happening. On my display, I could see those shapes had moved. They were no longer below us. They were around us, pressing against the Persephone's hull. They've got us, I said quietly. Torres looked at my display. That's impossible. There's nothing physical there to grab onto. But she was wrong. Over the next hour, despite everything Rodriguez and his team tried, the Persephone slowly sank. Not quickly, but steadily, like invisible hands were pulling us down. We're at 3,200 meters, Rodriguez reported, his voice tight, past crush depth. But the hull wasn't creaking, the pressure wasn't increasing, because we were passing through the boundary layer. I felt it when we crossed over, a sensation like plunging into cold water, even though we were already submerged. The air in the submarine changed, became thicker somehow, easier to breathe, almost pleasant. Atmospheric sensors showing composition change inside the hull, matching the layer's properties. Seal all compartments, Torres ordered. Emergency protocols. But it was too late. Whatever was in that layer, it was already inside with us. Mitchell stopped screaming in the medical bay. I could hear Dr. Chen's muffled voice talking to him calmly. Patterson looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. "We're going to die down here," he said. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure he was wrong. The Persephone settled at 3,400 meters, well below the boundary layer. Outside the hull, through the cameras, we could see the luminescent water. And in that light, we could see them clearly now, the things that had pulled us down. They had been human once. You could still see traces of it in their basic shape, but they'd changed, elongated. Their limbs had fused and reformed into appendages better suited for swimming. Their faces had flattened, eyes growing larger to capture more light. Gills had opened along their necks, and their skin had taken on that same luminescent quality as the water around them. There were dozens of them. They swam around the Persephone in lazy circles, watching us with those huge eyes, waiting. Commander Torres tried everything to regain control of the boat. Nothing worked. It was like the Persephone had become part of the layer, responding to its rules instead of physical laws. "We need to go outside," Foster said. "What?" Torres turned on him. "The layer is breathable. We've confirmed it. If we go outside, we can assess the damage, maybe repair whatever's keeping us trapped. Or we can become like them," I said, pointing at the camera feeds. "The transformation takes time, days or weeks. We only need a few hours to fix this." Torres considered it. "How long?" "The Tantalus crew started showing changes after 3 weeks of exposure. We've been here less than a day. And Mitchell, he's already changing. He was exposed more directly when we deployed the ROV, breathed in a concentrated dose. For the rest of us, it'll be gradual." Torres made the worst decision she ever made. "Rodriguez, prep diving equipment. You and I are going outside." I wanted to argue, but what choice did we have? Stay in the submarine and slowly transform, or attempt repairs and hope we could surface before the changes became permanent? Rodriguez and Torres entered the airlock. I watched on camera as they equalized pressure and opened the exterior hatch. For a moment, they just stood there, staring at the water that shouldn't be breathable. Then Torres stepped out. She didn't drown, didn't gasp for air. The water flowed into her lungs, and her body accepted it. Rodriguez followed, both of them moving awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. The transformed humans watched, but didn't interfere. They just circled slowly, patient. Torres and Rodriguez spent 2 hours outside. They checked the ballast tanks, the dive planes, every system they could access, and they found something that made Torres's face go white on the camera feed. The Persephone had been modified, not by the Navy, but by something else. Biological growth had covered critical systems, integrating with them. It looked like coral or bone, but it pulsed with that same luminescence. The growth had formed a perfect seal, locking us in the layer. When Torres and Rodriguez returned to the airlock, I could already see the changes. Their skin had taken on a faint glow. Their eyes had shifted slightly, pupils dilating wider. And when they spoke, their voices sounded different, softer, with a strange echo. "It's not mechanical failure," Torres reported. "The submarine has been adapted, changed to exist in this layer." "By what?" Foster demanded.
Torres looked at the camera feeds showing the transformed humans outside. "By them, or by whatever created them." Over the next 12 hours, the situation deteriorated. Mitchell had fully transformed. Dr. Chen kept him sedated in the medical bay, but we could all see through the observation window what he'd become. His fingers had fused into webbed appendages. Gills had opened along his ribs. His face had begun the process of flattening, bones restructuring. And we were all starting to feel it. The changes were subtle at first, easier breathing despite the increasingly strange air composition, better vision in the dim light, a growing comfort with the water pressing against the hull. Patterson was the next to break. He opened an interior hatch and just walked into the flooded section, letting the luminescent water take him. We watched him transform rapidly, his body accepting the change eagerly, as if this was what he'd been waiting for all along. Foster's scientists were frantically collecting data, trying to understand the mechanism, but even they were changing, their movements becoming more fluid, their speech patterns shifting. I spent most of my time at the sonar station because it was the only thing that still made sense. But even that was different now. I could hear more than before. The hum I'd been detecting resolved into something complex and beautiful. Not just sound, but communication. The transformed humans were talking to each other in frequencies I could now perceive. They were telling each other stories about lives they had before, about ships they'd served on, about the moment they realized they weren't going to die, they were going to change. And underneath those stories was something else, a presence, vast and ancient and patient, the thing that had created the layer, the thing that was slowly converting us to live in it. Commander Torres tried one last time to reach the surface. She broadcast on all emergency frequencies, hoping someone would hear, but we were too deep, and the layer absorbed or reflected our signals. No one was coming to save us. "I'm sorry," Torres said to the crew. We'd gathered in the mess hall, maybe 15 of us left who hadn't yet transformed completely. "I should have refused this mission, should have questioned it more." "Wouldn't have mattered," Foster said. His voice had developed that strange echo now. "The Navy knew what this was. They sent the Tantalus here to fail, sent us to fail. They wanted to see what would happen, to see if the transformation could be controlled." "Could it?" I asked. "No. This isn't something humans created. It's much older, something that's been waiting in the deep for we don't know how long, waiting for us to find it." Over the next few days, I stopped fighting. What was the point? The changes felt natural now, even pleasant. My body was adapting to an environment that had been impossible before. I could see in near darkness, could hold my breath for hours. My skin had begun to glow faintly, matching the water outside. Dr. Chen documented everything in the medical log, even as she transformed herself. She noted that the process was painful at first, but became increasingly euphoric, the body's reward system encouraging the change, making us want it. Mitchell was the first person to leave the submarine. He simply opened an exterior hatch and swam out, joining the others who circled outside. They welcomed him with strange grace, teaching him how to move in this new world.
One by one, the crew followed. Commander Torres went out holding a picture of her daughter, then let it float away as her hands transformed into something that couldn't hold such things anymore. Rodriguez went with his tools as if he'd repair something out there, but dropped them quickly when the water took him fully. I held out longer than most, partially because I wanted to document what happened, to leave some record, but also because I was scared, not of the transformation itself, but of losing who I was, of forgetting Marcus Webb, sonar technician who'd served his country and loved a girl named Sarah back in Norfolk and promised his mom he'd visit more. But the air in the submarine was mostly the layer's composition now, and breathing it meant breathing in those microscopic organisms, billions of them, rewriting my genetic code one cell at a time. Fighting it was just delaying the inevitable. Foster was the last person I talked to before I left. He was almost fully transformed, his academic mind trying to process what was happening to him. "It's not malevolent," he said. "The presence in the layer. It's not trying to hurt us. It's just different, operating on timescales we can't comprehend. To it, we're like mayflies, here for a moment, then gone." "Then why change us?" I asked. "Because we found it, and once you touch this place, really touch it, you can't go back to being what you were. You become part of it, part of something much older than humanity." I made my way to the airlock. My body moved differently now, more fluid, already adapted. Opening the hatch didn't scare me like it would have days before. The water rushed in, and I let it fill my lungs. It didn't hurt. I swam out into the luminescent depths, and the others were there waiting. Torres, Rodriguez, Mitchell, Patterson, Chen, all transformed, all moving with a grace that seemed impossible. They welcomed me, and I felt their thoughts mixing with mine. Not words, but impressions, memories. They showed me the others who lived in the layer. Crews from ships that had disappeared over centuries. Scientists, sailors, fishermen. All changed, all adapted, all part of this strange new world that existed in the deep places where humans were never meant to go.
And beneath us, I could sense the presence Foster had described. Not a creature, but something like a living idea, an ecosystem unto itself. It had created the layer as a test, or maybe just as an experiment, a way to see if humans could adapt, could become something more suited to the majority of Earth that was covered in water. The Persephone sat empty behind us, a tomb that would eventually be crushed by pressure or absorbed by the layer. Inside, our personal effects remained, photographs and letters and reminders of lives we'd lived. But those lives seemed distant now, like memories from someone else. I tried to hold on to Marcus Webb, tried to remember what it felt like to walk on land, to breathe air without thinking about it, to feel the sun on my face. But with each passing hour, those memories faded, replaced by new sensations, new ways of experiencing the world. The transformation completed on the third day after I left the submarine. I looked at my reflection in a piece of polished metal from the Persephone's hull, and Marcus Webb wasn't looking back. Something else was. Something beautiful and terrible and completely adapted to this environment. The others taught me how to hunt in the luminescent depths, how to navigate by the subtle currents, how to communicate in frequencies that carried for miles. And slowly, I stopped trying to remember who I'd been. That life was gone. This was what I was now. Sometimes other submarines come to study the anomaly. We watch them from below, these people who haven't yet changed. They deploy their instruments and collect their data, never knowing how close they are to becoming like us, never understanding that the layer chooses who enters it,
calls to them with frequencies only certain people can hear. The Navy still sends crews, still trying to understand, to control, to weaponize. They never learn. Or maybe they do, and they send people anyway, sacrificing them to learn what we've already discovered. There is no controlling this place, no understanding it in human terms. You can only surrender to it, let it change you, and hope that something of who you were remains in what you become. I think about Sarah sometimes, wonder if she's still waiting for me, if she checks her phone hoping for a message, an email, anything to say I'm still alive. But I can't reach her, can't explain what happened, and even if I could, she wouldn't understand. How could she? The presence in the layer doesn't care about our losses, doesn't mourn who we were. It only cares that we've adapted, that we've become part of its grand experiment. And in some horrible way, that's comforting, because it means our transformation wasn't random or cruel. It was purposeful. We're serving a function we can't fully grasp, but we're serving it nonetheless. New crews arrive every few months. We've learned to recognize the signs, the way the submarines move too carefully, the way they linger at the boundary longer than they should. And we wait, patient as the presence that changed us, knowing that some of them will join us, knowing that the layer will continue growing, spreading, calling to more humans who can hear its song. I wonder how long before the Navy realizes the truth, that the layer isn't something to study or contain, it's something that's already won. Every submarine they send, every crew they sacrifice, just adds to our numbers, makes the layer stronger, proves that humans, for all our technology and confidence, are still just another species that can be adapted and absorbed by forces far older than our civilization. But I don't wonder for long, because those thoughts require a human perspective, and I'm not quite human anymore. I'm something else, something that lives in the deep places, in a layer that shouldn't exist, waiting for the next crew to arrive, waiting to welcome them home.